Part 2 of Cato on Agriculture. Varro's Rerum Rusticarum, Livre Tres, Book 1, The Husbandry of Agriculture. Introduction. The Literary Tradition of Country Life. Had I leisure, Fundania, this book would be more worthy of you. But I write as best I may, conscious always of the necessity of haste. For, if, as the saying is, all life is but a bubble, the more fragile is that of an old man, and my 80th year admonishes me to pack my fardel and prepare for the long journey. You have bought a farm and wish to increase its fertility by good cultivation, and you ask me what I would do with it were it mine. Not only while I am still alive will I try to advise you in this, but I will make my counsel available to you after I am dead. For, as it is befell the Sibyl to have been of service to mankind not alone while she lived, but even to the uttermost generations of men after her demise, for we are wont, after so many years, still to have solemn recourse to her books for guidance in interpretation of strange portents. So may not I, while I still live, bequeath my counsel to my nearest and dearest. I will then write 3 books for you, to which you may have recourse for guidance in all things which must be done in the management of a farm. And since, as men say, the gods aid those who propitiate them, I will begin my book by invoking divine approval, not like Homer and Aeneas, from the Muses, nor indeed from the 12 great gods of the city whose golden images stand in the forum, 6 male and as many female, but from a solemn council of those 12 divinities who are the tutelaries of husbandmen. First, I call upon Father Jupiter and Mother Earth, who fecundate all the processes of agriculture in the air and in the soil, and hence are called the Great Parents. Second, I invoke the sun and the moon, by whom the seasons for sowing and reaping are measured. Third, I invoke Ceres and Bacchus, because the fruits they mature are most necessary to life, and by their aid the land yields food and drink. Fourth, I invoke Robigus and Flora, by whose influence the blight is kept from crop and tree. And in due season they bear fruit, for which reason is the annual festival of the Robigalia, celebrated in honor of Robigus, and that of the Floralia, in honor of Flora. Next, I supplicate Minerva, who protects the olive, and Venus, goddess of the garden. Wherefore is she worshipped at the rural wine festivals. And last, I adjure Lympha, goddess of the fountains, and Bonus Aventus, god of good fortune, since without water all vegetation is starved and stunted, and without due order and good luck all tillage is in vain. And so, having paid my duty to the gods, I proceed to rehearse some conversations concerning agriculture, in which I have recently taken part. From them you will derive all the practical instruction you require, but in case anything is lacking, and you wish further authority, I refer you to the treatises of the Greeks and of our own countrymen. The Greek writers who have treated incidentally of agriculture are more than 50 in number. Those whom you may consult with profit are Hieron of Sicily and Attalus Philometor among the philosophers. Democritus the physicist Xenophon, the disciple of Socrates, Aristotle and Theophrastus, the Peripatetics, Archytas the Pythagorean, likewise the Athenian Amphilochus, Anaxagoras of Thasos, Apollodorus of Lemnos, Aristophanes of Malos, Antigonus of Syme, Agathocles of Chios, Apollonius of Pergamum, Aristandrus of Athens, Bacchius of Miletus, Bion of Soli, Carestius and Carius of Athens, Diodorus of Priene, Dion of Colophon, Diophanes of Nicaea, Epigenes of Rhodes, Evagon of Thasos, Euphronius of Athens, and his namesake of Amphipolis, Hegesias of Maronia, the two Menanders, one of Priene, and it just goes on and on with these Greek writers. I'm butchering most of the pronunciations of their names. If you want to look them up, you're going to need to go and get into the book to get the names, because I don't think there's any way that I pronounce them correctly, so you won't know how to spell them. We'll just go ahead and jump into the next paragraph to get to the useful information here. Of the definition of agriculture, what it is not. On the holiday which we call Sementive, I came to the temple of Tellus at the invitation of the sacristan. I was taught by my ancestors to call him Aditimus, but the modern purist tells me I must say Adituus. There I found assembled C. Fundanius, my father-in-law, C. Agrius, a Roman knight and a disciple of the Socratic school, and P. Agrasius, of the revenue service. They were gazing on a map of Italy painted on the wall. "What are you doing here?" said I. "Has the festival of the seed-sowing drawn you hither to spend your holiday after the manner of our ancestors by praying for good crops?" "We are here," said Agrius, "for the same reason that you are. I imagine because the sacristan has invited us to dinner. If this be true, as your nod admits, wait with us until he returns, for he was summoned by his chief, the aedile, and has not yet returned, though he left word for us to wait for him." "Until he comes, then," said I, "let us make a practical application of the ancient proverb that, quote, the Roman conquers by sitting down, end quote." "You're right," cried Agrius, "in remembering that the first step of a journey is the most difficult." He led the way to the benches forthwith, and we followed. When we were seated, Agrasius spoke up. "You who have traveled over many lands," said he, "have you seen any country better cultivated than Italy?" "I, for one, don't believe," replied Agrius, "that there is any country which is so intensely cultivated. By a very natural division, Eratosthenes has divided the earth into two parts, that facing south and that facing north. And as without doubt the north is healthier than the south, so it is more fertile. For a healthy country is always the most fertile. It must be admitted, then, that the north is fitter for cultivation than Asia, and particularly is this true of Italy. First, because Italy is in Europe, and second, because this part of Europe has a more temperate climate than the interior. For almost everlasting winter grips the lands to the north of us. Nor is this to be wondered at, since there are regions within the Arctic Circle, and at the pole where the sun is not seen for 6 months at a time. Yea, it is even said that it is not possible to sail a ship in those parts because the very sea is frozen over. Would you think it possible, said Fundanius, for anything to grow in such a region, and if it did grow, how could it be cultivated? The tragedian Pacuvius has spoken sooth where he says, quote, should sun or night maintain everlasting rain, then all the grateful fruits of earth must die, nipped by the cold or blasted by the heat. End quote. Even here in this pleasant region, where night and day revolve punctually, I am not able to live in summer unless I divide the day with my appointed midday nap. How is it possible to plant or to cultivate or to harvest anything there where the days and nights are 6 months long? On the other hand, what useful thing is there which does not only grow but flourish in Italy? What spelt shall I compare with that of Campania? What wheat with that of Apulia? What wine with that of Falernum? What oil with that of Vinafrum? Is not Italy so covered with fruit trees that it seems one vast orchard? Is Phrygia, which Homer calls in Greek Ampeloessa, more teeming with vines, or is Argos, which the same poet calls Greek Polypyros, more rich in corn? In what land does one Eugarum produce 10, nay even 15, cullae of wine, as in some regions of Italy? Has not M. Cato written in his book of Origines that, quote, that region lying this side of Araminium and beyond Picenum, which was allotted to colonists, is called Roman Gaul? There in several places a single Eugarum of land produces 10 cullae of wine. Is it not the same in the region of Faventia, where the vines are called Tre Centaria, because a Eugarum yields 300 amphorae of wine? And looking at me, he added, indeed, L. Martius, your chief engineer, said that the vines on his Faventine farm yield that much. The Italian farmer looks chiefly for two things in considering a farm: whether it will yield a harvest proportioned to the capital and labor he must invest, and whether the location is healthy. Whoever neglects either of these considerations and despite them proposes to carry on a farm is a fool and should be taken in charge by a committee of his relatives. For no sane man is willing to spend on an agricultural operation time and money which he knows he cannot recoup, nor even if he sees a likely profit, if it must be at the risk of losing all by an evil climate. But there are here present those who can discourse on this subject with more authority than I. For I see C. Licinius Stolo and C.N. Tremelius Scrofa approaching. It was the ancestor of the first of these who brought in the law for the regulation of landholding. For the law which forbade a Roman citizen to own more than 500 jugera of land was proposed by that Licinius, who acquired the cognomen of Stolo on account of his diligence in cultivating his land. He is said to have dug around his trees so thoroughly that there could not be found on his farm a single one of those suckers which sprung up from the ground at the roots of the trees and are called stolones. Of the same family was that other C. Licinius, who, when he was tribune of the people, 365 years after the expulsion of the kings, first transferred the sovereign function of the law, making from the comitium to the forum, thus as it were constituting that area of the farm of the entire people. The other, whom I see come hither, is Cn. Tremelius Scrofa, your colleague on the Committee of 20 for the division of Campanian lands, a man distinguished by all the virtues and considered to be the Roman most expert in agriculture. And justly so, I exclaimed, for his farms are a more pleasing spectacle to many on account of their clean cultivation than the stately palaces of others. When one goes to visit his country place, one sees granaries and not picture galleries, as at the, quote, farm of Lucullus. Indeed, I added, the apple market at the head of the Sacred Way is the very image of Scrofa's fruit house. As the newcomers joined us, Stolo inquired, "Have we arrived after dinner is over? For we do not see L. Fundilius, who invited us." "Be of good cheer," replied Agrius, "for not only has that egg, which indicates the last lap of the chariot race in the games at the circus, not been removed, but we have not even seen that other egg, which is the first course of dinner. And so until the sacristan returns and joins us, do you discourse to us of the uses or the pleasures of agriculture, or of both. For now the scepter of agriculture is in your hands, which formerly, they say, belonged to Stolo." "First of all," began Scrofa, "we must have a definition. Are we to be limited in discussing agriculture to the planting of the land, or are we to touch also on those other occupations which are carried on in the country, such as feeding sheep and cattle? For I have observed that those who write on agriculture, whether in Greek or Punic or Latin, wander widely from their subject. I do not think that those authors should be imitated in that," said Stolo, "for I deem them to have done better, who have confined the subject to the straitest limits, excluding all considerations which are not strictly pertinent to the subject. Wherefore the subject of grazing, which many writers treat as a part of agriculture, seems to me to belong rather to a treatise on livestock. That the occupations are different is apparent from the difference in the names of those we put in charge of them. For we call one the farmer Villicus, and the other the herdsman Magister Pecoris. The farmer is charged with the cultivation of the land, and is so called from the villa or farm house to which he hauls in the crops from the fields, and from which he hauls them away when they are sold. Wherefore also the peasants say via for via, deriving their word for the road over which they haul, from the name of the vehicle in which they are doing the hauling, vectura, and by the same derivation vela for villa, the farmhouse too, and from which they haul. In like manner, the trade of a carrier is called velatura, from the practice of driving a vectura or cart. Surely, said Fundanius, feeding cattle is one thing and agriculture is another, but they are related. Just as the right pipe of the tibia is different from the left pipe, yet they are complements because while the one leads, it is to carry the air, and the other follows, it is for the accompaniment. And, to push your analogy further, it may be added, said I, that the pastoral life, like the tibia dextra, has led and given cue to the agricultural life, as we have on the authority of that learned man, Dicaearchus, who, in his Life of Greece, from the earliest times, shows us how in the beginning men pursued a purely pastoral life and knew not how to plow, nor to plant trees, nor to prune them, only later taking up the pursuits of agriculture, whence it may be said that agriculture is in harmony with the pastoral life, but is subordinate to it, as the left pipe is to the right pipe. Beware, exclaimed Agrias, of pushing your musical analogy too far, for you would not only rob the farmer of his cattle and the shepherd of his livelihood, but you would even break the law of the land, in which it is written that a farmer may not graze a young orchard with that pestiferous animal which astrology has placed in the heavens near the bull. See here, Agrias, said Fundanius, let there be no mistake about this. The law you cite applies only to certain designated kinds of cattle, as indeed there are kinds of cattle which are the foes and the bane of agriculture, such as those you have mentioned. The goats, for by their nibbling they ruin young plantations, and not the least vines and olives. But because the goat is the greatest offender in this respect, we have a rule for him which works both ways, namely, that victims of his family are grateful offerings on the altar of one god, but should never come near the fane of another, since by reason of the same hate, one god is not willing even to see a goat, and the other is pleased to see him killed. So it is that goats found among the vines are sacrificed to Father Bacchus, as it were, that they should pay the penalty of their evil doing with their lives. While on the contrary, nothing of the goat kind is ever sacrificed to Minerva, because they are said to make the olive sterile, even by licking it, for their very spittle is poison to the fruit. For this reason, goats are never driven into the Acropolis of Athens, except once a year for a certain necessary sacrifice, lest the olive tree, which is said to have its origin there, might be touched by a goat. No kind of cattle, said I, are of any use to agriculture, except those which aid in the cultivation of the land, as they do when they are yoked to the plough. If this was so, said Agratius, how could we afford to take cattle off the land, since it is from our flocks and herds that we derive the manure which is of the greatest benefit to our purely agricultural operations? On your argument of convenience, said Agrias, we might claim that slave dealing was a branch of agriculture, if there were agricultural slaves which we dealt in. The error lies in the assumption that because cattle are good for the land, they make crops grow on the land. It does not follow, for by that reasoning other things would become part of agriculture which have nothing to do with it, as for example spinsters and weavers and other craftsmen which you might keep on your farm. Let us then agree, said Scrofa, to exclude livestock from our consideration of the art of agriculture. Does any one want to exclude anything else? Are we to follow the book of the two Cicernas, I inquired, and discuss whether the manufacture of pottery is more related to agriculture than mining for silver or other metals? Doubtless the material comes out of the ground in both cases, but no one claims that quarrying for stone or washing sand has anything to do with agriculture. So why bring in the potter? It is not a question of what comes out of the land, nor what can be done profitably on a farm, for if it were, it might as well be argued that had one a farm lying along a frequented road, and a site on it convenient for two travelers, it would be the farmer's business to build a crossroads tavern. But surely, however profitable this might prove, it would not make the speculation any part of agriculture. It is not, I repeat, whether the business is carried out on account of the land, nor out of the land, but that it may be classed as a part of agriculture, but only if from planting the land one gains a profit. You are jealous of this great writer, interrupted Stolo. Because of his unfortunate potteries, you rebuke him captiously, and give him no credit for all the admirable things which he says about matters which certainly relate to agriculture. At this sally, Scrofa, who knew the book and justly contemned it, smiled, whereupon Agratius, who thought that he and Stolo alone knew the book, demanded of Scrofa a quotation from it. Here is his recipe for getting rid of bugs, said Scrofa. Steep a wild cucumber in water, and wherever you sprinkle it, the bugs will disappear. And again, grease your bed with ox gall mixed with vinegar. Fundanius looked at Scrofa. And yet Cicerna gives good advice, even if it is in a book on agriculture, he said. Yes, by Hercules, said Scrofa, and especially in his recipe for removing superfluous hair, in which he bids you take a yellow frog and stew it down to a third of its size, and then rub the body with what is left. I would rather cite, said I, Cicerna's prescription for the malady from which Fundanius suffers, for his corns make wrinkles on his brow. Tell me, pray, quickly, exclaimed Fundanius, for I had rather learn how to root out my corns than how to plant beetroots. I will tell you, said Stolo, in the very words he wrote it, or at least as I heard Tarquina read it. When a man's feet begin to hurt, he should think of you to enable you to cure him. I am thinking of you, said Fundanius. Now cure my feet. Listen to the incantation, said Stolo. May the earth keep the malady. May good health remain here. Cicerna bids you chant this formula thrice 9 times. To touch the earth, to spit, and be sure that you do it all before breakfast. You will find, said I, many other wonderful secrets in Cicerna, all equally foreign to agriculture, and so all to be left where they are. But it must be admitted that such digressions are found in many other authors. Does not the agricultural treatise of the great Cato himself fairly bristle with them? As, for instance, his instructions how to make musk cake and cheesecake and how to cure hams? You forget, said Agrius, his most important precept. If you wish to drink freely and dine well in company, you should eat 5 leaves of raw cabbage steeped in vinegar before sitting down to the table. What agriculture is. And so, said Agratius, as we have agreed upon and eliminated from the discussion all those things which agriculture is not, it remains to discuss what it is. Is it an art? And if so, what are its principles and its purposes? Stolo turned to Scrofa and said, You are our senior in age. In reputation and in experience, you should speak. And Scrofa, nothing loath, began as follows. In the first place, agriculture is not only an art, but an art which is as useful as it is important. It is furthermore a science which teaches how every kind of land should be planted and cultivated, and how to know what kind of land will produce the largest crops for the longest time. The purposes of agriculture are profit and pleasure. The elements with which this science deals are the same as those which Ennius says are the elements of the universe: water, earth, air, and fire. Before sowing your seed, it behooves you to study these elements because they are the origin of all growing things. So prepared, the farmer should direct his efforts to two ends: profit and pleasure. One solid, the other agreeable. But he should give the preference to the pursuit of profit. And yet those who have regard for appearances in their farming, as for instance by planting their orchards and olive yards in orderly array, often add not only to the productiveness of the farm, but as well to its saleability, and so doubly increase the value of their estate. For, of two things of equal usefulness, who would not prefer to buy the better looking? The farm which is healthiest is the most valuable, for there the profit is certain. On the other hand, on an unhealthy farm, however fertile it may be, misfortune dogs the steps of the farmer. For where the struggle is against death, there is not only the profit uncertain, but one's very existence is constantly at risk. And so agriculture becomes a gamble in which the farmer hazards both his life and his fortune. And yet this risk can be diminished by forethought, for when health depends upon climate, we can do much to control nature, and by diligence improve evil conditions. If the farm is unhealthy by reason of the plight of the land itself, or of the water supply, or is exposed to the miasma which breeds in some localities, or if the farm is too hot on account of the climate, or is exposed to mischievous winds, these discomforts can be mitigated by one who knows what to do and is willing to spend some money. What is of the greatest importance in this respect is the situation of the farm buildings, their plan and convenience, and what is the aspect of their doors and gates and windows. During the Great Plague, Hippocrates, the physician, saved not merely one farm but many cities because he knew this. But why should I summon him as a witness? For when the army and the fleet lay at Corcyra, and all the houses were crowded with the sick and dying, did not our Varro here contribute to open new windows to the healthy north wind, and close those which gave entrance to the infected breezes of the south? To change doors, and to do other such things, and so succeed in restoring his comrades safe and sound to their native land? The fourfold division of the study of agriculture. I have rehearsed the elements and the purposes of agriculture. It now remains to consider in how many divisions this science is to be studied. I have supposed these to be without number, said Agrius, when I have read the many books which Theophrastus wrote on the history of plants and the causes of vegetation. These books, said Stolo, have always seemed to me to be fitter for use in the schools of the philosophers than in the hands of a practical farmer. I do not mean to say that they do not contain many things which are both useful and practical. However that may be, do you rather explain to us the divisions in which agriculture should be studied? There are 4 chapters for the study of agriculture, of the highest practical importance, resumed Scrofa, namely, what are the physical characteristics of the land to be cultivated, including the constitution of the soil? What labor and equipment are necessary for such cultivation? What system of farming is to be practiced? What are the seasons at which several farming operations are to be carried out? Each of these 4 chapters may be divided in at least 2 subdivisions. The first into A, study of the soil, and B, a survey of the buildings and stabling. The second into an inquiry as to C, the men who will carry on the farming operations, and D, the implements they require. The third into E, the kind of work to be planned, and F, where the work is to be done. The fourth into what relates G, to the annual revolution of the sun, and H, to the monthly revolution of the moon. I will speak of the 4 principal parts first, and then in detail of the 8 subdivisions. Concerning the farm itself. How conformation of the land affects agriculture. 4 things must be considered in respect of the physical characteristics of the farm: its conformation, the quality of the soil, its extent, and whether it is naturally protected. The conformation is either natural or artificial as the result of cultivation, and may be good or bad in either case. I will speak first of natural conformation, of which there are 3 kinds: plain, hill, and mountain, although there is a 4th made up of a combination of any 2 or all 3 of those mentioned, as may be seen in many places. A different system of cultivation is required for each of these 3 kinds of farms, for without doubt that which is suited for the hot plain would not suit the windy mountain, while a hill farm enjoys a more temperate climate than either of the other 2 kinds, and so demands its own system of cultivation. These distinctions are most apparent when the several characteristic conformations are of large extent, as for example, the heat and the humidity are greater in a broad plain like that of Apulia, while on a mountain like Vesuvius the climate is usually fresher and so more healthy. Those who cultivate the lowlands feel the effects of their climate most in summer, but they are able to do their planting earlier in the spring, while those who dwell in the mountains suffer the most from their climate in winter, and both sow and reap at later seasons. Frequently, the winter is more propitious to those who dwell in the plains, because then the pastures are fresh there, and the trees may be pruned more readily. On the other hand, the summer is more kindly in the mountains, than the upland grass is rich when the pastures of the plains are burnt. And it is more comfortable to cultivate the trees in a keen air. A lowland farm is best when it is gently sloping rather than absolutely flat, because on a flat farm water cannot run off, and so forms swampy places. But it is a disadvantage to have the surface too rolling, because that causes the water to collect and form ponds. Certain trees, like the fir and the pine, flourish most in the mountains on account of the eager air, while in this region, where it is more temperate, the poplars and the willows thrive best. Again, the arbute and the oak prefer the more fertile lands, while the almond and the fig trees love the lowlands. The growth on the low hills takes on more of the character of the plains, on the high hills that of the mountains. For these reasons, the kinds of crops to be planted must be suited to the physical characteristics of the farm, as grain for the plains, vines for the hills, and forest for the mountains. All these considerations should be weighed separately, with reference to each of the 3 kinds of conformation. It seems to me, said Stolo, that so far as concerns the natural situation of a farm, Cato's opinion is just. He wrote, you will recall, that the best farm was one which lay at the foot of a mountain looking to the south. Scrofa resumed, so far as concerns the laying out of the farm, I maintain that the more appearances are considered, the greater will be the profit, as, for instance, orchards should be planted in straight lines arranged in quincunxes at a reasonable distance apart. It is a fact that, because of their unintelligent plan of planting, our ancestors made less wine and corn to the acre than we do. The point is that if each plant is set with due reference to the others, they occupy less land and are less likely to screen from one another the influence of the sun and moon in the air. This may be illustrated by an experiment. You can press a parcel of nuts with their shells on into a measure having only 2/3 of the capacity of what is required to contain them after they have been cracked, because the shell keeps them naturally compacted. When trees are planted in rows, the sun and the moon have access to them equally from all sides, with the result that more raisins and olives are developed and then mature more quickly. A double result, with the double consequence of a larger crop of must and oil and a greater profit. How character of soil affects agriculture. We will now take up the second consideration in respect of the physical characteristics of a farm, namely, the quality of the soil, which, partly, if not entirely, determines whether it is considered a good or bad farm, for on this depends what crops can be planted and harvested and how they should be cultivated, as it is not possible to plant everything successfully on the same soil. For one soil is suitable for vines, another for corn, and others for other things. In the island of Crete, near Cortinia, there is said to be a plane tree which does not lose its leaves even in the winter, a phenomenon due doubtless to the quality of the soil. There is another of the same kind in Cyprus, according to Theophrastus. Likewise, within sight of the city of Sybaris, which is now called Thurii, stands an oak having the same characteristic. Again, at Elephantine, neither the vines nor the fig trees lose their leaves, something that never happens with us. For the same reason, many trees bear fruit twice a year, as do the vines near the sea at Smyrna, and the apples in the fields of Constantinium. The effect of soil appears also from the fact that those plants which bear most profusely in wild places produce better fruit under cultivation. The same explanation applies to those plants which cannot live except in a marshy place, or indeed in the very water. They are even nice about the kind of water. Some grow in ponds like the reeds at Riadi, others in streams like the alders in Epirus, some even in the sea like the palms and the squills of which Theophrastus writes. When I was in the army, I saw in Transalpine Gaul, near the Rhine, lands where neither the vine nor the olive nor the pear tree grew, where they manured their fields with a white chalk which they dug out of the ground, where they had no salt, either mineral or marine, but used in place of it the salty ashes obtained from burning a certain kind of wood. Stolo here interrupted. You will recall, he said, that Cato, in comparing the different kinds of soil, ranked them by their merit in 9 classes according to what they would produce, of which the first was that on which the vine would grow a plentiful supply of good wine, the second that fit for an irrigated garden, the third for an osier bed, the fourth for an olive yard, the fifth for a meadow, the sixth for a cornfield, the seventh for a woodlot, the eighth for a cultivated orchard, and the ninth for a mast grove. I know he wrote that, replied Scrofa, but every one does not agree with him. There are some who put a good pasture first, and I am among them. Our ancestors were wont to call them not prela, as we do, but parata, because they were always ready for use. The sedile Caesar Vulpicus, in pleading a cause before the censors, once said that the prairie of Rosia was the nurse of Italy, because if one left his surveying instruments there on the ground overnight, they were lost next day in the growth of the grass. A digression on the maintenance of vineyards. There be those who assert that the cost of maintaining a vineyard eats up the profit. What kind of vineyard, I ask? For there are several. In one, the vines grow on the ground without props, as in Spain. In another, which is the kind common in Italy, the vines climb and are trained either separately on props or with one another on a trellis, which last is what is called marrying the vine. There are 4 kinds of trellis in use, made out of poles, of reeds, of ropes, and of vines themselves, which are in use respectively in Phalerum, in Arpinum, in Brundisium, and in Mediolanum. There are 2 methods of training the vine on trellises. One upright, as is done in the country of Canusium, the other crossed and interwoven, as is the practice generally throughout Italy. If one obtains the material for his trellises from his own land, the expense of maintaining that kind of vineyard is negligible, nor is it burdensome if the material is procured from the neighborhood. Such trellis material, as has been described, can be grown at home by planting willows, reeds, and rushes, or something of that kind. But if you propose to rely on the vines to form their own trellis, then you must plant an arbustum, where the vines can be trained on trees, such as maples, which the inhabitants of Mediolanum use for that purpose, or fig trees, on which the people of Canusium train their vines. Likewise, there are 4 kinds of props used for the cultivation of unwedded vines. First, the planted post, which is called ridicum, and is best when fashioned out of oak or juniper. Second, poles cut in the swamp. The more seasoned they are, the longer they will last. But it is the practice to reset them upside down when they rot in the ground. Third, for lack of something better, a bundle of reeds tied together and thrust into a pointed tube of baked clay, which is then planted in the ground and serves to preserve the seeds from water rot. The fourth is what may be called the natural prop, when vines are swung from tree to tree. Vines should be trained to the height of a man, and the interval between the props should be sufficient to give room for a yoke of oxen to plow. The least expensive kind of vineyard is that which brings wine to the jug without the aid of any sort of prop. There are 2 of this kind, one in which the earth serves as a bed for the grapes, as in many places in Asia, and where usually the foxes share the crop with man, or if mice appear, it is they who make the vintage, unless you put a mouse trap in every vine, as they do on the island of Pandentaria. The other kind of vineyard is that where each shoot, which promises to bear grapes, is lifted from the earth and supported about 2 feet off the ground by a forked stick. By this means the grapes, as they form, learn to hang, as it were, from a branch, and do not have to be taught after the vintage, as they are held in place with a bit of cord, or by that kind of tie which is the ancients called a cestus. As soon as the farmer sees the vintagers turn their backs, he carries these props under cover for the winter, so that he may use them another year without expense for that account. In Italy, the people of Rieti practice this custom. Thus there are as many methods of cultivating the vine as there are kinds of soil. For, where land is wet, the vine must be trained high, because when wine is being made and matured on the vine, it needs sun, not water, as when it is in the cup. For this reason it was, I think, that first the vine was made to grow on trees. Of different kinds of soil. It is expedient, then, as I was saying, to study each kind of soil to determine for what it is, and for what it is not, suitable. The word terra is used in three senses: general, particular, and mixed. It is a general designation when we speak of the orb of the earth, the land of Italy, or any other country. In this designation is included rock and sand and other things. In the second place, terra is referred to particularly when it is spoken of without qualification or epithet. In the third place, which is the mixed sense, when one speaks of terra as soil, that in which seeds are sown and developed, as for example, clay soil or rocky soil or others. In this sense, there are as many kinds of earth as there are when one speaks of it in the general sense, on account of the mixtures of substances in it in varying quantities, which make it of different heart and strength, such as rock, marble, sand, loam, clay, red ochre, dust, chalk, gravel, carbuncle, which is a condition of soil formed by the burning of roots in the intense heat of the sun, and from which each kind of soil is called a particular name, in accordance with the substances of which it is composed, as a chalky soil, a gravelly soil, or whatever else may be its distinguishing quality. And as there are different varieties of soil, so each variety may be subdivided according to its quality, as, for example, a rocky soil is either very rocky, moderately rocky, or hardly rocky at all. So, 3 grades may be made of other mixed soils. In turn, each of these 3 grades has 3 qualities. Some are very wet, some very dry, some moderate. These distinctions are of the greatest importance in respect of the crops, for the skilled husbandman plants spelt rather than wheat in wet land, and on dry land barley rather than spelt, in medium land both. Furthermore, there are still more subtle distinctions to be made in respect of all these kinds of soil, as for example, it must be considered in respect of loam, whether it is white loam or red loam, because white is unfit for nursery beds, while red loam is what they require. But the 3 great distinctions of quality soil are whether it is lean or fat or medium. Fat soils are apparent from the heavy growth of their vegetation, and the lean lie bare, as witness the territory of Pupinia in Latium, where all the foliage is meager and the vines look starved, where the scant straw never stools, nor the fig tree blooms, while for the most part the trees are as covered with moss as are the arid pastures. On the other hand, a rich soil like that of Etruria reveals itself heavy with grain and forage crops, and its umbrageous trees are clean of moss. Soil of medium strength like that near Tibur, which one might say is rather hungry than starved, repays cultivation in proportion as it takes on the quality of rich land. Diophanes of Bithynia, said Stolo, was very much the point when he wrote that the best indication of the suitability of soil for cultivation can be had either from the soil itself or from what grows in it. So one should ascertain whether it is white or black, if it is light and friable when it is dug, whether its consistency is ashy or too heavy, or it can be tested by evidence that the wild growth upon it is heavy and fruitful after its kind. But proceed and tell us your third division, which relates to the measurement and laying out of the farm. And here I'm going to cut it off, and I will see you in part 3.